together in the way that we came together to support each other. And that made the road to going through that that much better.
Yeah, we are talking about grief, loss, loss of a loved one. It might be, in your case, it could be a spouse. It could be, in Pastor Bill's case here, it was a child. Okay, and I don't know how we got on this subject.
Talking about yesterday.
Okay, yes, that's right. So here's a widower, Pastor Dan, and Sue, a widow.
No, they say portion.
And so they are having, number one, as I sit here, there's no cognitive way to touch that. I thought it to be interesting that you brought out the portion about when Moses and Israel agreed, and that was permissible. But then God kind of, pulled the plug on that.
Move on.
Yes. So
Watch out for the lamb.
yeah, he hit that one, I hit the other one. So, okay, let's see if we can set the table here. So loss is part of life. There's none of us are going to escape that on any level. I mean, it could be as minimal as losing your keys, and as grievous or as intense as losing a spouse or a child. One's material, one's immaterial. That's distinctively different. But even in the most grievous scenarios, so we mentioned the encounter that Jesus Christ had with the widow of Nain, and again, the fact that that's included in the scriptural narrative, that the Holy Spirit thought that to be important enough, to put in. So here we are 2,000 years later reading it, and on some level we can identify what comes out is a recognition of the sensitivity of Jesus Christ. Because he was traveling, he had his entourage, they were on a destination, and the funeral dirge was coming the other way, and the two collided, in a sense. And it would have been easy to just kind of pass as ships in the night, we could say. But he didn't do that. He wouldn't do that. And so his desire to be able to minister in a moment, in that moment, to that need, as grievous as it was, as significant as it was. And it wasn't an issue of salvation. It wasn't an issue of dealing with sin or religious doctrine. And I think so much, we can go down that road of the reasons why we may not in a moment want to minister to someone without an agenda, without, an objective, without, a theological conclusion, but just they need you.
Yeah.
And if that can be distilled in my approach to outreach or prayer, like why would I want to be drawn into someone else's prayer need when I got a bunch of needs myself? Like I'd like to ask you, would you please pray for me? And that, that exists, but I don't want to live locked into my needs so much that I cannot, or I think that I can't minister to someone else, that I don't have something to give to someone else. And I think we all get confronted on that whenever we go to a funeral, and here are the people who have lost a loved one, okay, and we have those colloquial phrases, and I guess in a measure we mean it. I'm sorry for your loss. I think we mean it, but we also sense a total inadequacy in being able to even touch it. And so that uncomfortableness, I think, is a good thing. In fact, I think Ecclesiastes talks about better to be in the house of mourning than in the house of mirth, or where everything's just fine, because then what it says that then you consider, number one, you consider the fragileness of life. Okay, it's like we're not durable creatures. We were talking earlier about the many things that could take a human being out. The fact that we're sitting here, gentlemen, and we are above 60, and we have relative health, we have ability to do, we have some sort of cognitive, resources. Some. It's all some. We all know those other sums. But the backdrop is that if we really were to consider the things that have taken people out of life, people have lost their life, falling down steps, choking on a piece of food, getting an infection in their blood, whatever. It doesn't have to be cancer, it doesn't have to be heart, it doesn't have to be COVID. It just is like everyday stuff. Okay. So we're fragile. We are vulnerable in a very real way. And I think that youth, the youth mentality doesn't embrace that. They have this sense of invincibility. That's why they do all this crazy, extreme sports. But at the same time, I think that the important thing is that there's this element, and it's Jesus Christ. It's God being for us in a way that we don't necessarily consciously acknowledge it until we are like in a funeral home and there's somebody that we know stretched out in the box, okay, and we realize, in a measure, there is that finality, and closure. Okay, let's talk about that, Pastor, because and we're so thankful, Pastor. Okay, but let's go back to that setting, like who shows up at those kinds of needs, not just widows and widowers.
Lost one. The depth of the grief is directly related to the quality of the relationship that existed before.
Wow.
And that relationship could be, a spouse relationship, could be a child, it could be a brother, sister, or just even a friend. And the other point I made earlier was that that sometimes people kind of stuff their feelings away, and it's not until maybe years later that they realize, no, I need to deal with this. That it's something I haven't come through it in a healthy way. And I think so much of it has to do with finding life. I can go forward with life in in a quality way without that person. And coming to that reality. Well, in a lot of cases, my in-laws are an example of this. My mother-in-law died in, I think it was 2014, August of 2014, and her husband died like 10 months later. And this is normal that when you've lost somebody that close to you, they were married for over 60 years, that when you lost somebody that close to you, that finding a strong reason to live without that person isn't always an easy thing, and some people never find that reason to live without that person.
Wow.
And so typically death happens in a lot of cases where, especially where you're dealing with elderly, that when one spouse goes, the other one goes, typically within a year later. And
that's so true. And yet, what was the I don't know how many years, Ruth Graham, Billy Graham's wife, died, but he lived another 15 or 20, I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
it was significant. He died, in his late 90s.
Because he has ministry had moved on. He was, he saw
a person who says, when I retire, okay, whatever that might be. Maybe it's a set date in their mind, but they're not doing anything in their life presently that would carry on into the retirement. Thus, when they get there, they wake up, and I don't have to go to work today.
There's a great biblical example of this, which I often think about. Circumcision is a picture of loss, and this was something that was done in Jewish society. Moses struggled with getting his kids circumcised, even though he was the one who. And it is taking something away. You are taking something away from a person.
It's cutting away.
It's cutting away, like gone. 1 minute it's there, now it's gone, and you're in pain. It isn't like, and they do it when you're a baby because you forget about it. It's just like you quickly move on because your little mind doesn't absorb those things. But it's merciful. But the very first, when they got circumcised, when they went into the promised land, if you read the order of things, they said, and everybody, all the males got circumcised all at once.
Wow.
And then the next event is them marching around Jericho. And you notice that they marched around it one day, and then they marched more, and then more. And you can imagine they're in enemy territory. They're like, and there's always a question of why didn't, when the angels pushed down the walls into the ground and the whole thing, why didn't that? You can imagine the first day when they're marching around, they're all marching like they just got off a horse and they've never ridden a horse. And like, this is a painful march around Jericho. And then it's the next day.
Liken it to a vasectomy.
And it's like, and then so days and days, it was like then the angels pushed the walls down into the ground. It was at that point they were moving in this vision, and they actually had a capacity to take the city, and the city fell quickly. But I often think about that, and it says with circumcision that we've been circumcised in the heart, and we kind of pass over that, like that was some sort of invisible thing that happened to us, and it didn't. No, we lost something. Like when our heart gets circumcised, it means you painfully are losing something. This isn't just a ritual that happens that now qualifies you for holiness. Like it is, and loss is often like that. It's a circumcision that's painful, where you lose something and you don't ever get that thing back. But what happens is, we know with circumcision and the whole thing, there's a sanitary aspect to that and a sensitivity aspect to that. That's produced, that can be produced no other way.
And it's done intentionally.
Yes.
It's not an accident.
It's not, yeah. And so this thing didn't just happen to somebody. God, like Lazarus is dying and Jesus waits.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
He waits, and you're like, was he cruel? He loved Lazarus.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he's a man walking by faith. I mean, not operating in but he's led by the Spirit. He's led in his walk to wait. Why? Because there was a circumcision that took place, but then there was an addition. There was this great addition to both Mary and Martha's and Lazarus's life that could be produced, and he fulfilled messianic prophecies and all these things. Like, the glory of what happens afterwards is far surpasses the pain of what's happening in the moment. But I think that is like, my walk must be a Great Commandment, Great Commission oriented walk, because it allows me to have a momentum to move forward and through these things, because I always have a purpose. There's people going to hell.
Yes.
I have a purpose. I have the gospel, and it's like, I can't. And if I allow myself to be moved back into that, to move into the purpose that we all have as believers, but that I have particularly in my call, then it's like, I think it's like Paul getting bitten by the serpent when he's collecting wood. Shakes it off into the fire and keeps going, and it's miraculous that he lives.
I didn't come here to get bit.
Yeah, it was like, I've got my mind, I've got my heart set on, the people to the Gentiles, like he was the apostle to the Gentiles, and that wasn't what did it. It was a miraculous thing, but it was a function in his call that allowed him this momentum, which there's a supernatural provision that's in that momentum.
Wow. Pastor Bill, I know you got something warmed up there, and that's good. Let's talk a little bit about when people come, to the Reef Share, and we said there's no formula. But what you're describing, Pastor, is a provision, which is no respecter of persons. And it's like, if I understand God has a plan for my life, and the plan didn't end with the loss, like what you were saying, when the circumcision, when what was there was cut off, and it's not coming back. That didn't interrupt the plan. And actually, it was part of the plan. And how have you find even believers being able to process that in their own hearts? Or are you able to effectively lead them to that understanding so that they can get past? Because they're stuck.
Yeah.
They're stuck.
Typically, what happens is that you isolate yourself from others during that time because of the strangeness of the feelings, and not feeling like you're this is like you're in la la land, in a different place, and the comfort. 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 3. The Father. He's the God of all comfort. He's the Father of mercies. And Paul says that I want to comfort others with the comfort that I have been comforted with by God. Okay. That there is a community process that is intended to go on here as you experience the loss of somebody, that God is going to come into your life with a provision, with the comfort of others to help you find. To help you find that place where you're, where you've now recognized, now I can go on. That that these feelings, and that I see there's at least hope. That I now see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, because others have come into my life and brought sanity to a moment of insanity, and given me normalcy in the midst of my abnormalcy.
Okay.
And So now I'm in a place where it's like, okay, now I can move on. So much of losing something in life, whether it be a child, a close one, doesn't have to be a child or a spouse or whatever, that these events are all ordained of God. They're part of a master plan, and they are intended to allow us to move through the chapters of our life. Ecclesiastes, a time for every season under heaven. So we live in this realities of seasons, and each season has different characteristics. Time to be born, and time to die. That whole list there. In Ecclesiastes, these areas of our life are different, and so therefore, moving from one season to another season is a part of letting God be God in the whole process, taking us from season to season. And it's the loss of things is intended to bring us to the next place. That in a lot of cases, losing that person opens the door for something else to happen that would otherwise not have happened without that person having gone.
You can say that. I hear you. I'm not disagreeing with you by any means.
But you won't see that in the midst of it. It's after.
No, that's true. But can any of that be realistically front-loaded? Meaning, so do I today, right now, comprehend, okay, I'm living in an eternal purpose. I'm born again. My destination is heaven, but I have a destiny now on the earth. And because what you were talking about were folks who acknowledge that God is God, and they could say, we could say, oh, the sovereignty of God is at work here, taking out this person or changing this circumstance. Because look at where we're living now. So we will not get back to what, quote unquote, is no. Do we dare say? Yes, I guess we do. We dare say that we have lost the freedoms that we previously had in this country. We have lost, I don't think they're coming back, apart from some kind of cataclysmic revolutionary kind of thing, okay? Oh, did I say that? It's on the internet. Yes. Okay. But truth be told, there's life after death. See, resurrection, if Jesus Christ didn't come forth from the grave, we would have a good religion of good goals, good aspirations,